Alrighty.
Yeah.
So we are here for the TIG X Space finally. Let me just do the usual posting of the link in all the respective chats. 1 second. Mhm. Okay, excellent. So guys, apologies for the technical difficulties. They seem to be a constant thing whenever we're doing an X Space, but so far they've been overcome. So, I did have the rubric for today's discussion written up, but someone brought something to my attention late yesterday evening and early this morning, which is that John has been vindicated yet again. I keep joking that it's going to be a weekly thing, but so far, for the past 6 weeks, it has been a weekly thing. It turns out that Google DeepMind in the last week released or rather notified everyone that they have an AI agent in the works called Alethea. And what Alethea is a you know it's a configured researcher, an autonomous agent for mathematics research. So this is an agent that is meant to function autonomously and on its own. It may do research alongside actual humans, but it's meant to tackle these problems and theorems without the external input of a human that is supervising it. And we've gotten some validation of what its capabilities might look like. So you guys might be familiar with the International Math Olympiad Proof Bench Advanced. This is a test that various AI companies have been using to validate the efficacy of its models. The prior record was 65.7% score, which means that it got 65.7% of questions completely correct. And Alethea has bested that by, let's see, just under 50%. So they've achieved a score of 95.1% in terms of accuracy, which is, of course, a monumental leap forward. And I saw some other benchmarks that it participated in. It's even scoring 100% on some of those. Now, a lot of these are PhD level tests that are meant to test the know how of some of the most intelligent and advanced researchers in the world. The fact that an AI is able to do this at this point means that we're getting pretty close to the event horizon, I think, for AGI. It's pretty incredible to see in real time. And the space is moving so damn fast that there seems to be a new breakthrough like this every single week, if not every day. Um,
hmm
John, you've been predicting that Google is going to be pulling ahead this year. It's really going to cement and
Yep.
establish itself as the leading player in artificial intelligence. That seems to be happening.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So it's I have no doubt that there's a very powerful mathematical software AI capabilities now, which will significantly improve the productivity of the average professional mathematician. I think this was proved by Terence Tao's paper when he did a review or a write up of a project he did with Alpha Evolve, which isn't uh, available to the public, but they gave him and some collaborators of his a kind of special access in order that they could test it and say whether it was useful to them and what they achieved. It is notable that a lot of these products, they tend to be sort of less useful to the more capable kind of engineer or mathematician, sort of on average later. So, Ying, for example, didn't start using a kind of Claude code or AI assistants quite recently because he's a particularly good coder, and it would sort of slow him down. and now he is using them, and he finds them useful to increase even his productivity. So all this is just to say that the fact that even Terence Tao, the famous guy who will people cite him as the best living mathematician, that it has some significant positive benefit for him, means that it will have a significant positive benefit for pretty much any mathematician, we can assume. So that's a kind of state of maturity that it's reached. One thing I would be wary against is, I mean, you said, I haven't read the kind of full press release, but you said that the kind of idea of this is that it can do mathematics autonomously, without having to have the input of a person. No doubt it can. This is the thing: you can sort of do anything, but the question is, does it do it well or anywhere near as well as if, say, a trained mathematician, a sort of human, professional mathematician, is sort of giving it hints and nudging it along if and when it gets stuck. So that's the question, and I'm not sort of inferring anything or kind of accusing Google of anything. But put it this way: if I was Google's strategist or the strategist of any of these AI companies, a very, very useful thing to do is to make people believe, get the kind of zeitgeist guys to be that people sort of just lazily assume that these products are already more or less autonomous. They can do the job of a mathematician, they can do a job of a lawyer, and so on and so forth. And we've reached that state of technological maturity. And the reason why that's very useful is because if you believe that, then you stop really kind of thinking twice about using them. You're like, oh, it's kind of pretty much over anyway. My job, I'll get made obsolete in a few years, and I have a bit of fun and just using this as a capable partner, right? So they're not thinking if they think it's already there, then there's you haven't really got anything to lose. But my thesis is that it's not already there. It's significantly inferior to the combination of a mathematician and the AI working as collaborators. And they need that to happen because they haven't got the know-how yet. And that's how you get the know-how. So you can't say
Hmm.
to everybody, hey, this is a great tool. Like, it can't do anything autonomously yet. But if you use it as a collaborator, it will, number one, boost your productivity, which I believe is true. And number two, we'll get to suck out all your know-how so that it can then become autonomous. That isn't as good of a sales pitch,
Right.
and so that's not the one that they give. But that doesn't mean to say that it isn't true. And so that this is just something to flag, because I do hear a lot of people, on X and social media. It is quite puzzling to me. People who apparently don't work for Google or Claude or Anthropic or anything, simply repeating things that they've said in their press release as if they are somehow some kind of oracle of truth. Because obviously they know they're experts, and so they know how their product works, don't they? Well, it's not about telling people how your product works accurately. It's about winning the race. It's about making money. It's about building a bigger and more profitable company, right? That's their objective, not to be some kind of truth machine. They do what they need to do to compete. This is why they are preeminent in the world. So please put that through your filter. Know that everybody's listening to this space has that mindset. I have no doubt about that. But it certainly is a bit depressing that the wider world haven't quite caught up to that
Yeah, so I do think you
fact.
flagged a good point, which is that these companies are incentivized to say the best things about themselves, and they're very fortunate in that they psyopt everyone else into farming their Elon bucks by repeating talking points that you can find in the press releases. It makes a lot of sense that would play out this way. We always talk about incentive alignment and what kinds of behaviors are encouraged. This is
Yep.
what's encouraged. So just keep that in mind. But one thing that you said that kind of scared me a little is that we're reaching the point now where these agents are so useful that even Ying is finding that his
Yep.
productivity and his efficacy is bolstered by collaboration with them.
Yep.
And that hasn't been the
That's
case at
right.
any point previously. I think we've all had a lot of fun with AI at this point, um, having it
Yep.
answer all of our deepest, darkest questions. But in terms of how useful it's been for PhD level researchers and the best people in their area in the world, it's yet to prove itself in that capacity. But it looks like that's beginning to happen, and it means that people
That's
are
right.
they're going to shelve whatever moral quandary they have with the uptake of know-how, and they're just going to admit to themselves, well, it's either I use this or I get left in the dust by my colleagues. I become less employable. I become less effective. My company
Yes.
stops winning as much because it's being beaten by people who are using
Precisely.
augmentations. It's a
That's
little bit
right.
like being Usain Bolt, and then all of a sudden PEDs get legalized, but you decided that you're going to adhere to the tried and true methods that you've used your entire career. And suddenly everyone is blowing
Yep.
past you because they have more nitrous oxide in their blood and they're vasodilated and they're just a lot faster and better than you. So,
Yeah. No, you're right. This is a very important thing to flag. So there's stages of this. As I said before, most people will kind of use the tools with careless abandon. They probably should be a bit more cautious, and they'll give away their know-how simply because they're not really aware. They don't sort of perceive their know-how. It's quite a sort of intangible thing. A lot of people, undervalue it. They don't really think of it as it's something kind of within them that can be extracted. So that's stage number one. Stage two is that maybe this knowledge or awareness of this will spread. People will become a little bit nervous, a bit more hesitant. But the thing is, if you've moved forward enough in that time, you're right. You can't stop using it because the tool is so useful. You become significantly less productive without it. And so it's sort of like a tragedy of the commons. You could stand back, maybe you could rally your friends against it. But if it's going to get the know-how from everybody else anyway, your abstention only serves to basically obsolete you in the near term. Whereas if you just go all in and say, if you can't beat them, join them, you still get obsoleted, but just in the slightly longer term. And of course, the game theoretic logic of that is that you go in and you use it. So in that sense, it's a bit of a kind of a pincer movement. It certainly helps to be aware that this is happening, but even awareness doesn't necessarily, kind of remedy the situation.
yeah, I mean, as this progresses, I'm sure we'll start to see conscientious objectors, but I think a lot of people are going to look at them and be like, well, see you at the finish line, buddy. Because
Yeah,
there's
no,
going to be no way that you can
absolutely.
conceivably compete with me. And it's funny now. Uh, People have pointed out that um, it's its own kind of skill interacting with large language models. You have prompt engineering. You have all these different things you have to take into account when you're trying to extract maximum efficacy from them, which means that, I mean, you could be the best researcher in one area, but not the best at prompt engineering. You could actually be overtaken by people who are significantly inferior to you because they've used
Yes.
LLMs effectively to such a degree. And then it's no longer, um, well, I guess it still is a sprint about merits, but it's configured differently such that raw skill is no longer enough to uh, allow you to win out in the end.
Yeah, you're right. So it is true that there might be certain other types of skills which are, that some guy might not have been particularly good at maths before, and then suddenly, with now that it's not really about human mathematicians competing against one another, but it's about human AI pairs. So you kind of pair up with your AI, and it's almost like your collaborator. And in the short term, it may well have a sort of positive effect, I think, because it could lower the barrier to entry to somebody being able to meaningfully contribute to certain mathematical fields. Some people might be like highly creative, but they don't have the sort of encyclopedic memory which a lot of mathematicians have, and probably need because it's so useful to be able to just recall constructions from other papers. So it's sort of it could change the dynamics a little bit, and that in itself is good. You mix things up, maybe make it accessible to more people. But as my what this is basically telling us is that opting out isn't an option. That isn't a solution because you'll be out competed. So what you need to do is offer somebody an alternative, another agent, which may even elicit their know-how. This is what I'm in favour of, but it gives them the option to keep it locally. But also it gives them the option to offer the benefit of that know-how to other agents in a network. And this is pretty much, not to give too much of a preview, but what I've been kind of fleshing out the design of. Because simply, just abstaining isn't good enough because of this dynamic whereby you become uncompetitive. So you need a way to stay competitive, but yet not allow your know-how to be number one extracted and two aggregated in a central place, because that's the difficulty. If it's all held by Google or something, then the sort of fate is a dark one in the long term.
Yeah, we've already seen other AI companies position themselves this way in the market. I think DeepSeek, there are versions of it, or maybe even the de facto version of it, that allows you to store all the information that you put into it locally. So people are beginning to realize that this might give them an edge in the market, allowing people to keep their secrets for themselves. But it remains to be seen whether that's going to become a wider trend. Now, I do want to pivot toward the subject of today's space. You guys might have seen it already. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics that I've not spoken about previously publicly, which is aliens. So, If you have been paying attention to even pop science for a significant portion of your life, you've probably come across this before. There's a concept called Fermi's paradox. I'll go ahead and explain it very quickly. So, I think there are 131 constants present on the planet Earth that allow it to birth and maintain life. It's a very delicate balance because if any of these are disrupted, then life becomes no longer viable, which would be horrific. But yeah, we're kept in balance by 131 different factors that allow the planet to cultivate life. And once you go and look at how many planets are in the galaxy, how many planets are in the universe, at least we've estimated how many there might be, it's in the billions, if not trillions, because we only have the known universe to look at the moment. So, given the prerequisites for life and the amount of planets that there are, it is statistically likely that there is life, extraterrestrial life, maybe even intelligent life somewhere out there. We've been looking for it for a while, but we're still in the beginning days of doing that. Now, we've made efforts, whether it's sending radio waves or transmitters out into the outer stretches of the solar system and beyond, at making contact with extraterrestrial life. There are people on Earth, even some of them very respected scientists, who have made a name for themselves talking about this topic, brainstorming that there might already be ETs on the planet itself. I won't get too carried away with that. But
Hmm.
essentially, is
Hmm.
extremely statistically likely that there's extraterrestrial life. And yet, in spite of that, we have not discovered it. That is called the Fermi Paradox. Now,
Hmm.
John, you were very excited when I spoke to you earlier this week. You said you had formulated a new perspective on the Fermi paradox that actually happens to be coincidentally TIG related. Let's hear it.
Hmm. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The Fermi paradox, as you said, the mystery. Where are all the aliens? And people have proposed various sort of creative solutions to this. Some of it, many of which are a little bit depressing, of course, because it's sort of
Are we alone?
it implies that that what stopped the aliens from coming. Maybe everybody gets to a certain, all the civilizations get to a certain level of technological maturity, and they were, maybe you could assume that these civilizations kind of came about through biological evolution, which is a process which does tend to sort of necessitate a bit of pugnacity, kind of, sort of aggression towards one's enemies, of course, because you have to survive. And then maybe technology gives people powerful weapons like nuclear weapons. They all destroy themselves. That's kind of one thing that has been sort of posited. Yeah, people. The downside to that is, like, we have nuclear weapons and we haven't destroyed ourselves yet. It doesn't seem like vanishingly unlikely that people could somehow refrain, given dynamics like mutually assured destruction, so on and so forth. Yeah, there's various other things, like the aliens are all around us, but they just sort of make themselves invisible, or the dark forest. Everybody's hiding from one another because they don't want some other kind of super. There's always a bigger fish, right? Some other kind of civilization might come and wipe you out if it's sort of aware of your existence. And that was a sort of clever one from the three body problem. So my one, it just occurred to me. I was thinking through this thesis, and especially kind of playing around with this analogy to the singularity and the event horizon. Um, I made a tweet about this analogy recently, but just for anybody who hasn't heard about it, I realized there's a sort of fixation in the world of AI about talking about the singularity. It's not really a surprise. It's kind of like an exciting, slightly scary topic. To think about what would happen when AI becomes much more intelligent than humans, and it can self-improve by writing its own algorithms and maybe designing improved hardware and so on. So this is kind of debated ad nauseum, and people kind of feel like, because of the rate of improvement of AI, it feels like surely this must be quite close. But to my mind, this sort of a focus on the singularity, or its kind of dominance in the sort of the kind of narrative, or the kind of common just topics headspace, I suppose, like the attention that it gets, means that people haven't thought about this concept of what's things that could happen before that, or even things which must necessarily happen before that. And drawing the analogy to the black hole, you can't reach the singularity unless you've gone through the event horizon first. The event horizon surrounds the black hole, which is the singularity is at the center. And just to take the analogy a little bit further, it's also kind of known, or strongly conjectured from theory, that particularly large black holes have event horizons that are very far away from the center, and you can pass through them without even noticing. And yet, even though you could just pass through it and everything kind of look the same, of course, something very serious has happened once you've passed through that event horizon. Namely, you can never get out of it again. So all your hopes and dreams of exploring the universe are literally over, provably, physically and mathematically, as soon as you pass through that event horizon, which makes it kind of sinister that it can happen without you knowing. And this is back to the AI analogy. I must admit I'm kind of worried about this. And one of the it's hard to define it specifically, but certainly one of the things which is characteristic in my mind of the event horizon is a particular point that that AIs get to. Of course, as I said before, everybody's focused on, oh, this AI could do mathematics itself, it could improve its algorithms itself and then, implement it to its own code and get better and stuff. These are singularity things, which are all kind of possible in principle. But the event horizon happens much, much earlier than that. And the event horizon happens when a tool becomes useful enough that it becomes indispensable to a human being. And that sounds a bit weird, like that's not very techy or that's not very sci-fi, right? Like talking about human beings and AIs collaborating. But the reason why it's so important is because this final piece of the puzzle, the know-how, the strategic knowledge that you need to usefully apply the knowledge, which is all in the books and papers, the things that you try when you get stuck while trying to solve problems to unstick yourself, which I've written about extensively, that's still inside human minds for the moment, but there's no reason why it necessarily needs to remain there. And the only way to get it at scale is to make a tool which is useful enough that a human being who's an expert collaborates with that AI tool as if they were kind of a colleague. And AI tools haven't been that good. They've been around for a while, of course, since ChatGPT, many years, but it's only very recently they've really been good enough that they can sort of collaborate. You bounce your ideas off, you work through the problem in collaboration with the AI, like a colleague. And what you're doing when you're doing that is you're transferring know-how to it, because that's how human beings learn know-how. They don't learn it from books overwhelmingly or papers. They learn it from interacting and collaborating with other human beings, because it's only in human beings' heads, so it gets passed down almost by a sort of oral tradition. So this stuff is known about the kind of tacit knowledge and the know-how. That's also most definitely how a computer can elicit it from a person. And people think it's sort of unsexy. Oh wow, we've got a good thing, like, but when is it going to be able to self-improve? Stop thinking about that. You've got to think about something which is going to be very, very serious and going to happen earlier, which is the point at which the tools become indispensable to human beings. That's the point at which, even if you're aware it's eliciting your know-how, it becomes very hard to opt out, because it's a game theoretic trap. It's like an arms race. Relative to the other mathematician, you're much less productive. And so you can't you're just like, okay, well, do I get sacked now or do I get sacked later? It's kind of a hard thing to get out of. So the reason that this is interesting to me, just to accelerate it on a little bit, is because there is, in my mind, a very distinct possibility that this means that we never reach the singularity. And the reason is because something very weird happens when the data flywheel spins up. And if one company gets a sort of, a dominant position, they're sort of accelerating away from the others because they're extracting the know-how, and nobody else will use any other tool because the know-how is being used to improve the tool. And you'll never use the second best tool, as long as it's, significantly inferior to yours. You're only ever going to use the best tool, again, because otherwise you'll be uncompetitive. And so when they get to this comfortable position, so the world changes in such a fundamental way. So we think that competition is something almost like baked into the world, like a law of physics. It isn't. Competition is an artifact of the distribution of basically resources and the distribution of what other people are capable of and may or may not do. And that's the reason why people are trying to push this technology. Google are thinking, are Anthropic catching up? Are they kind of a bit? So we've got to go as fast as we can. US is thinking, on a global scale, maybe China's going to get ahead of this technology, or maybe they're going a bit too fast. That's the reason why they improve it, because they think, okay, there are some risks with this, right? Improving technology as fast as you can. Maybe you can't do all the safety checks you want to do, but it's that traded off against, okay, maybe China's going to reach AGI or get some dominant technology. And, that would be even worse, right? Because then we kind of get subjugated. So this is the balance they have to make. But when you're dominant and you not only are very far ahead from your competition, but then you can also utilize the very technology that you've developed to have a sort of level of surveillance and gain a level of confidence that your competitors are quite comfortably far behind you. the game theory starts to change, and it's you start to become more rational to say slow down the development, don't do anything too kind of rash. We've got all the time in the world. We're no longer out in this incredible mad race because we're confident in our position, and we can now start using all the money that we get from having these AI tools, which everybody has to use, to buy political influence, to create AI generated propaganda to keep people under surveillance so that we know they're not, developing something kind of secret that might sneak up on us, right? It becomes about the maintenance of the dominant position. And this is known since Adam Smith. That's why monopolies are so pernicious. But monopolies in the past have always, ended up being dismantled, of course, sooner or later. But it's dependent on some assumptions which AI makes very, very shaky indeed, that there has to be a power that's greater than you, a government which can say, even to Standard Oil and Rockefeller, okay, you've got to dismantle your company. But when you have the power to create propaganda at zero cost, when you have so much money, you can buy people and manipulate them and surveil them and maybe even blackmail them, right? It's like it sort of merges into one entity. And it's like you're going to sort of dismantle yourself. Of course, you're irrational to do that. And then it becomes keep everybody else down. And almost the only thing which could nudge us off this, very comfortable crown, this throne of supremacy on which we sit, is maybe something from left field. We build some kind of technology that gets out of our control, right? So they don't want to build ASI anymore. They don't want to build anything that could, start having its own ideas. The focus becomes on constructing technology, number one, to surveil people, number two, to influence people, influence public opinion. We're not going to the stars. Who wants to? You're not going to go to the stars anymore. You build a colony on Mars or on some other different star system. That's very difficult to surveil, right? If it's far enough away, something could happen, and by the time you get the information back, they built some kind of technology which might challenge yours or sort of break your grip. So it's just so weird that the incentives flip. You want to keep everybody close. You want to slow down the pace of technological development, and it's manage stagnation. That's what becomes the rational choice after that. And not only to manage stagnation, but also to put things in place which keep it stagnant into the future. So even if you were coerced or captured or somebody else with different ideas took over, it's very hard for them to reverse it. You do things like start systematically destroying certain areas of knowledge and technology. You forbid their study. You might even June style start putting around some sort of
Mhm.
religious faith. One of the doctrines of which is do not build a machine that can think. It's the strongest taboo. And these things mean that becomes entrenched. So it's not only your decision; it's your decision to make this happen, and very, very hard to undo, and increasingly hard into the future as the grip gets tightened and tightened. And so it does make you wonder, and this is what kind of popped into my mind, maybe this is some kind of convergent thing. Maybe this is sort of the nature of what is likely to happen when you develop technology to this point. You don't, in fact, reach the singularity. You don't, in fact, get the super intelligent machine, which will allow you to build starships and have medicine that will solve all of the diseases and make people live forever. Maybe what happens is it gets a monopoly, and then the incentives that we always just assume are almost laws of nature suddenly flip, and then you're strongly incentivized to basically manage eternal stagnation after that. And it sounds weird, but the more you think about it, number one, it's possible, and number two, the incentive is there. So I mean, you just got to sort of start to think maybe this is a genuine possibility, and quite a disturbing
Yeah,
one.
so what John's talking about here might sound really far-fetched, but it turns out that the black hole analogy does truly work in practice. So, for example, when you cross the event horizon, this is what our understanding of physics presently tells us. You endure a process that is literally called spaghettification, and it's more or less what it sounds like. You are ripped apart atom by atom by the sheer gravity of the black hole's singularity. Now, anyone looking at you from the exterior is just going to see essentially a picture of you frozen in time that inches infinitesimally closer to the singularity, but never actually changes. But we know from our studies that you've actually just been destroyed and ripped apart. Now, it sounds really far fetched to be making this analogy, but you can actually look to some of the authors that have been thinking about these kinds of problems for decades now. Whether it's the Warhammer 40K universe or Dune, these are both two separate universes in science fiction where AI has been made illegal. In the case of Warhammer 40K, it's already been illegal for 10,000 years because there was a great war between mankind and its robotic servants, where the robots rebelled and tried to overthrow
Hmm.
humanity. Now, anytime this happens in that
Hmm.
universe, you get what's called exterminatus, which is where the emperor of mankind and his minions decide, okay, this has gotten out of control. We should just glass the entire planet. And these are both
Hmm.
instances where people fly close to the event horizon, realize that it would be a mistake to pass it, and just turn away. So, this forced stagnation that John is talking about is something that actually has an enormous precedent in all the literature that attempts to brainstorm what the future might be like. You brought it up yourself,
Mm.
John, but you kind of stole my point. It's no, 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 it's
Oh,
all right because it's a really interesting one and it's one worth talking about. We've talked about how once all the know-how is inserted into AI and it becomes this kind of godlike being, we become so dependent on it that it is inseparable from even the most basic human processes. So there are various different fictional universes that we can look to that describe what this looks like in practice. In Wall-E, everyone's fat and wheelchair bound. We have all regressed to a monkey-like state where we're incapable of living without assistance, doing anything without assistance. In Warhammer 40K, there's a concept called the machine spirit, in which religion has supplanted our understanding of technology such that we don't even know what technology even is anymore. We just pray to the spirit that we believe is inherent in the machines. And this is why, even 40,000 years in the future, Warhammer has what's called the dark age of technology, where we've regressed significantly and intellectually, despite being so far advanced beyond our wildest dreams. So there is
yeah,
various different literatures that attempt to tackle what this looks like in practice. Now, also, John, it's
absolutely.
it's it's worth pointing out some of the considerations in our own argument. So, for example, we're assuming that um, other races would operate based on a certain selection of capital based feedback loops. But whether it's Marx or Adam Smith, they both posited, despite being in their own distinct worlds when it came to their ideologies, they both posited that capitalism was a necessary prerequisite in order for civilization technology to reach escape velocity and advance to a degree where something like paradism is feasible. So,
Well, to be honest, I think that's very true. And again, in my personal view, it's sort of it's the same point made twice, in fact, because one of the reasons why actual communist societies, although some people might think they're sort of ethical because maybe they don't have a hierarchy and everybody's equal. Some people think that that's great. But if that was ever attainable, which I don't really think it is, but let's just say a thought experiment it was, we had some kind of world hippie commune, again, there would be no more progress because if you can't get the benefit of your inventions and so on and so forth, the incentive for sort of innovation and kind of building more powerful technologies is basically disappeared. The only reason the Soviets did it is because they didn't want to be taken over by the Americans, right? They wanted to take over the rest of the world, so they're going to build weapons for that. But that's because they had competition, and this is the thing. This kind of like equalness destroys the competition, and it's not a law of nature. It's more maybe just an accident of history. We wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have competition in the past. But you've got to remember that doesn't mean to say it persists into the future. Because it's possible to manage things. It's possible to nudge things back in and stabilize things. There's many things that have never been true. I mean, you couldn't fly a flat flying wing aeroplane up until the 1960s because it would always sort of get out of control. You sort of nudge the pilot would kind of be perturbed by some kind of random event, and then he'd sort of nudge it back in, and he'd overcompensate and it'd become unstable and so on and so forth. Well, guess what happened? They invented stabilization fly-by-wire technology, and now you can fly a flying wing indefinitely. It's not going to get out of control. And this is the people just assume that, like, this is a law of nature. It will be unending. Like, we can't keep people or things in control permanently. Well, you can if you invent the right technology. And this is that technology. You need surveillance. You need sufficient ability to influence public opinion. And so on and so forth. So it can happen. And to me, the most worrying thing about it is, again, I wouldn't make too strong claims. Like this Fermi paradox thing, as you said, is like couldn't somebody in the universe get out of it? Maybe someone's doing something different. It's not clear. Well, yeah. So maybe not. Maybe it's the argument for the Fermi paradox is going to need a bit of work, because by definition it requires you to be sort of sure that this
Mhm.
can't happen with a very, very high probability. Because there are, by assumption, millions of alien civilizations out there. But for our own domestic purposes, you don't require overwhelming. In fact, the burden of proof should be flipped on the other side. You have to be very sure that this isn't going to happen before we move into that event horizon area. Because what do you want to bet your the history of humanity not achieving all of these dreams, these wonderful things, going to the stars, having better medicine, having this, that, and the other? You're really going to imperil all of that, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody even thinks it's a possibility. Everybody just lazily assumes the singularity is going to arrive, but you have to pass through the event horizon first, and no one's talking about what that means.
Well,
So
John, history has shown us that whenever you conceive of a new idea and say nobody's talking about this, we're the people shouting about it. That posits the point from which onward people will begin talking about it. So, well, it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But just to wrap it all up for everyone and put a bow on it, what does this have to do with TIG and aliens? Like, what's the headline? Two
Yeah,
different questions, I suppose.
absolutely. So the thing is, again, the Fermi paradox thing is a bit of a. I mean, to be honest, I do think it's a genuine candidate for the Fermi paradox. I'm not going to say that's not. But the reason why I wouldn't focus on that too much is because it's a bit of a distraction. In order to have solved the Fermi paradox, as I said, you have to have basically prove your thesis to a very, very high level of probability. But in order for this to be something that literally every single technical person should be talking about 90% plus of their time, you only have to have a 10% or 5% or 1% level of certainty, because the number one, the consequences are
Mhm.
so serious, they're basically a permanent thwarting of humanity. And number two, it's like it just is a possibility that hasn't been examined, and it would be irreversible by definition. So that's what it's got to do with it, and the solution. Exactly like that. I'm going to publish part of this. TIG is part of the solution. It's a major part of the solution that I would propose. And the other part of it is something I did sort of mention earlier in the call. Basically, if you can have an AI agent and you can opt to allow it to elicit your know-how, so then it's stored locally on a machine that you control, and also you can have the option, because that isn't enough. Just everybody having their own know-how is useful, but the problem is you're outcompeted if somebody starts to pool know-how, because a lot of these strategies are sort of transferable and generalizable to some extent. So you'd have to make your agent available for other people, basically to ping it and ask for hints and advice when they get stuck on problems, when their agent gets stuck. And that gives people access to one another's know-how, but without it being sucked out. All you're doing is sort of giving a hint. You don't necessarily say why. And that could have a network effect, I think, which is sufficiently powerful to be a credible competitor to this sort of centralized alternative. So that is the sketch of what I propose, and the reason and where TIG comes into that is a little bit technical. Is if you're applying that particular model to algorithms specifically, you also need to solve the issue that there's a market failure in the
Mhm.
monetization of algorithms. So because otherwise your agent wouldn't be able to capture the value that it generates. So you need those two components, so then it's possible. It's worth a try, basically, because the alternative is too horrifying to countenance. But that's where TIG comes in.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, John. I think it's a very unique perspective that certainly I haven't thought of on my own. But it's always interesting to hear what kind of ideas you're tinkering with in your brain. So pivoting a little bit,
Yep.
people have been asking for a very, very long time now. When are we going to do something with BitTensor or some of the projects within BitTensor? You, John, have been uh, talking to Macrocosmos basically since they announced in November, December that they were doing something similar to TIG, although it's a different implementation. It does take a lot of inspiration from what we've built here. Um, there's a Macrocosmos joint event, is my understanding, coming up between TIG and them. What does that look like, and when can we expect to see that?
Yeah, so it's we're finalizing the date on Monday. About course, yeah. So it was interesting, kind of like a lucky accident. I was introduced to just a bit of prehistory. Jake from BitTensor quite a long time ago. Actually, some mutual friend met him in Dubai or something. This is before BitTensor blew up and became like a household name. I had a great chat with Jake. He said that I should chat with Stefan, who was the CTO at that time, I think. Um, we had some things in common. He was also like had a physics background, and so I spoke to Stefan very early on as well. And yeah, they're just both great guys. We're aligned. We have the same mission. We're kind of basically addressing different facets of it. And yeah, and you're right. Sort of Macrocosmos, which is a company which I think Stefan sort of co-founded and has several subnets. They're also interested in algorithms, which naturally you would be because they're incredibly important. And we do speak to different. We're not competitors, but in my mind, but they are sort of aiming to do the same thing. Basically, get people to use sort of AI to develop better algorithms. So actually, that's kind of basically where we differ. Like in our case, we're kind of agnostic, whereas they have a more focus on develop the AI tooling to develop better algorithms, which is just something that we are glad somebody is doing because we ourselves don't build AI tooling. So anyway, in terms of like kind of any sort of partnership and collaboration, we're still that's sort of still in the works. So that's not what we're going to talk about on just to manage people's expectations. We're not going to talk about that on the space. Well, we might do actually if we figure it out by then. But we're going to talk about sort of the mission, how we're complementary, and basically he and I are going to discuss our views of the world. Where we think the state of decentralized AI is going and where it needs to go. So that would be great. People have been sort of hinting at this and saying you should collaborate or do something a bit Tensor for quite a long time, and so we are. We're going to do it. So yeah, hope everybody here
Yeah, for
turns
those
up.
who aren't familiar with what John and I are talking about, Macrocosmos, one of their subnets, creates and improves AI agents that can contribute to algorithm development. So it makes sense that the two of us would be on the same page regarding the decentralization of algorithm development and AI as a whole. It is feasible and maybe even fated that macrocosmos agents will eventually contribute to TIG. That's something that could happen. And from what I've heard, their progress has been pretty compelling on that end, on building the agents themselves, not on contributing to TIG. But yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in today. It seems that it's time for the raffle. So you guys know how this
Mhm.
works. I put all the names in the wheel of names.com. I spin the wheel. I pick two winners. Each of them gets TIG. If you win, please DM me either on X or on Discord, and I'll send you your TIG tokens. So, first winner. That is Sergio. Sergio with the bold profile picture. Congratulations, you're our first winner. Do contact me. And here comes the second one. You've already won. So I'll pick a third. Yeah, Zach, congratulations. Zach, you're here all the time, dude. Thank you for coming week after week. We really appreciate you. And now you've been chosen for recognition by the raffle. Congratulations. Alrighty, that's about everything I had on the docket today. Uh, Thank you for coming, guys. And it's been a great space today, an interesting one, tackling some topics that we've not discussed in the past, but that are interesting nonetheless. Yeah, thanks for coming, and we will see you next time. Bye
Thanks
bye.
everyone. See you next time. Bye.